The final year of the Obama presidency saw thousands of people from all over North America converge in North Dakota in support of the Lakota people who were opposing the building of the gas pipeline that eventually was built, in spite of all the opposition. For so many of the people who came from everywhere, dropping everything to camp out in the snow and protest against the building of the pipeline, often involving riot police firing water cannon in freezing temperatures, the experience altogether was a life-defining one. Many of my friends from activist circles from all over went to Standing Rock in the winter of 2016. If I weren't occupied looking after a newborn baby at the time, I would likely have joined them there, but I only got as far as writing a song. After all the westerns, after all the lies, after making every effort to deny that history is happening, that it isn't in the past, that the Indian wars continue, that Ishi was not the last. After building all the pipelines, after spraying all the gas, after desecrating graveyards, being told they shall not pass, after shooting all the horses, after driving in with tanks, after sending in the dogs with soldiers in their ranks, they're standing up at Standing Rock. After all the fire water, after all the famine, after killing all the buffalo, after taking all the salmon, after taking all the water to slurry all the coal, after mining the uranium from a million giant holes, after stealing and lynching, shooting people as they dance, after trying hard to make sure there'd be no second chance, after declaring Indian country one big sacrifice zone, at no point ever trying to acknowledge or atone, they're standing up at Standing Rock. After all the cities ransacked, after all the cities burned, after all the centuries when almost no one even learned that these towns ever existed, up and down the coast, up and down the Mississippi, leaving colonists to boast this land is our land now, a new homeland for the white. After all the missionaries taking children in the night, after all the slaughter, after centuries of theft, watch the people rioting to defend what's left. They're standing up at Standing Rock. They're standing up at Standing Rock. At Standing Rock. In June of 2017, 72 people lost their lives in London when the cladding that had been put up to make some of the project housing look nicer had turned out to be made of a highly flammable material and caught fire. The fire spread because there were no fire breaks set up for the cladding to stop at any point in its vertical rise. The new additions to the building, the generally bad maintenance of it, the lack of safety updates in more recent years, and the generally sad state of public services in England all contributed to the high death toll in the Grenfell Tower fire, which was yet another bloody illustration of the consequences of the workings of unregulated capitalism and a lack of effective governance in general, and oversight of industries in particular. At 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, no one knew what was in store. The fire started and quickly spread till it covered every floor. Stairwell blocked, no way out. Smoke and fire all around. Parents grabbed their little babies, dropped them 10 floors to the ground. People cried to no avail, 24 stories tall, and
engulfed in flames. The fire ladders were just like toys, no use at all. There were no sprinklers, few smoke alarms, fire extinguisher out of date. All repairs, if ever done, always too little, too late. When they built Grenfell, they believed housing was a human right. But all that changed. Now if you're not rich, you should be kept out of sight, out of sight, out of town, or wrapped up neatly, plastic clad. The flats may all be falling apart, but at least they don't look too bad. The residents had tried to warn the authorities for years and years, but all their letters, all their blog posts, all their calls fell on deaf ears. Council housing taking space left to rot, for by and by it would someday be turned to dust in the forward march to gentrify. And in the meantime, if people perish with their children in their laps, it's the price the market has to pay to house the poor in fire traps. If this were murder, if this were murder, if this were murder, if this were murder.
In August 2017, some hundreds of right-wing activists from various groups held a rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, which was opposed by thousands of people. Physical confrontations became violent, particularly when a car was driven into a group of people as they were marching in the street and Heather Heyer was killed. The confrontational fascists versus Antifa character of Charlottesville, with two sides that completely vilify each other being portrayed by media as either angels or devils, depending on the media's bias, became increasingly the norm as the Trump and Biden eras and the era of polarized performative media progressed.
There was a massacre in church that got certain forces moving. Many towns are now at least superficially improving, such as in Virginia, where a statue of General Lee stands as a reminder of the days of slavery. In the city center, an indelible mark in the spot that's been renamed Emancipation Park, slated for removal when a judge intervened, which might be the moment that most fully set the scene for 19 injured, 1 killed today in Charlottesville. With their man in the White House, members of the right marched through the university, torches alight, chanting against immigrants, Africans and Jews. But it's not the flying bottles that put them in the news so much as the bigot in the car, revving his engine loud, speeding forward and then back, running down the crowd, using the same tactic promoted by Islamic State. Maybe he was even shouting, "God is great." 19 injured, 1 killed today in Charlottesville. Used to be in chains, now their descendants, who still remain, are being forced to leave by gentrification, just like poor white folks all across the nation. And with the presidential tweets and xenophobic rants, it's just a matter of time when some pawn takes the chance to plow into a march with half a ton of steel. This is not fake news, it's real. 19 injured, 1 killed today in Charlottesville. Injured, 1 killed today in Charlottesville.
Hundreds of people die every year trying to cross the border from Mexico into the U.S. They often die of thirst and exposure, insufficiently equipped for the extreme conditions in the more remote parts of the border where attempting the journey is most popular. For a very long time, there has been a tradition in the desert to leave water out there for people to find. One of the organizations that's been doing that in a methodical way for many years is No More Deaths, No Más Muertes. They follow in the footsteps of Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement, giving food to the hungry, clothing to the naked, welcome to the stranger. In 2018, the legislature in Arizona passed a new law involving extreme amounts of prison time for anyone who seeks to follow the instructions laid out in Matthew 25:35, providing the possibility of decades in prison for anyone who knowingly provides lodging or transportation for someone who is undocumented.
If you go to Pima County in the Sonoran Desert Lands, you'll find the town of Ajo among the cactus stands. The only town you'll see, the only water too. When someone is thirsty, there's no question what you do. For well over a century, it was a normal thing to have an extra jug of water that you might bring. In the harsh Sonoran, Arizona summer heat, we'd rather give the vultures something else to eat. You didn't ask where I was going, nor where I'd been. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was naked, you gave me clothes. I was a stranger, you let me in. I have this book here, a story I learned well. I always thought I understood the tale that it tells. It's spelled out very clearly in Matthew 25. What a good Christian does when a stranger arrives. You didn't ask where I was going, nor where I'd been. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was naked, you gave me clothes. I was a stranger, you let me in. Now there's a crackdown with life and death on trial. The only place with water for 100 miles. Facing 20 years in prison is a very mighty rod. Now all of us are forced to choose between Caesar and God. You didn't ask where I was going, nor where I'd been. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was naked, you gave me clothes. I was a stranger. You let me in. You let me in. You let me in.
For the latter half of 2017, and especially during the first half of 2018, the Trump administration was actively separating children from their parents when families of refugees were crossing the Mexico-U.S. border. Thousands of families were affected. Thousands of children and parents traumatized forever. Some have never been reunited.
She left late at night, out of sight of the gangs, the most violent place in the West. Just the clothes on her back to escape the attack, with one child held to her breast. For weeks they would go through Mexico, where Rosita and so many others would learn too late that the United States takes babies away from their mothers. When Rosita was younger, the future looked brighter. But then came 2009. A junta, a coup, and prospects were few as the bodies were stacked up in lines. She tried to stay, but there was no way when they kidnapped and tortured her brother. So she got to the border where they're following orders to take babies away from their mothers. She might stay in Monterey, but the gunmen were always so near. She knew she had to push on, make it to Houston, where she might live a life without fear. Their journey was done. Rosita, her son, at the border, they held one another. Oh, how he wailed as they took her to jail and tore him from the arms of his mother. She left late at night, out of sight of the gangs, the most violent place in the West. Just the clothes on her back to escape the attack, with one child held to her breast.
Many people have made comparisons between the rise of Hitler and the rise of Trump. There are many parallels. Both cases begin with an economic crisis, a failure of left-of-center governing authorities to deal with the crisis in a way that allowed the working class to prosper, and the tendency of those very authorities to throw their lot in with the fascists, if the possible alternative being considered by the population might be socialism. After the defeat of what the Marxists sometimes called bourgeois democracy by the forces of National Socialism in Germany, as with the rise of Trump in the USA, there are those who still must resist, even if their cause seems to be one that is lost for the time being. In Germany during Hitler's rule, there are an estimated 20,000 people who engaged in actions that were sure to end in their deaths, and were also extremely unlikely to result in the defeat of the Third Reich. But some people just had to do something, and so since that time, and for some people for a long time to come, the white rose will always mean something more profound than it did before it became the icon of a doomed resistance. Willem van Spronsen was one American who felt he had to take some kind of action and couldn't just stand by while watching refugees get mass deported back to war zones. In July of 2019, he took action and was killed for it.
When it's 2019, but it feels like 1933. When your eyes are open, when you know the history. When your parents lived through things that looked so much like this. All the indications impossible to miss. When you've sought for your whole life to make the earth a better place, and you once again see the rising of the master race. When you know that they are coming, when they announced it in advance. When you know for many people this will be their last chance. Then you may ask the question, what can one person do when the time to act is now? And now it's up to you. When it's 2019, but it feels like 1933. When indefinite detention is the new reality for so many children to whom you did not give birth. When you see they're just as precious as every other child on earth. When they're opening the camps, not used since the war, where families were imprisoned decades before. When Kristallnacht is coming, they announced it on the news. When the writing's on the wall, when you can see the fuse, then you may ask the question, what can one person do when the time to act is now? And now it's up to you. When it's 2019, but it feels like 1933. When you know rallies are not helping and silence is complicity. When you know where the kids are kept locked inside their cells. When you see approaching the future this foretells. When they're coming for your neighbors. When they've even said what day they plan to put them all in buses and take them away. When you know where they keep the buses. You've been to the parking lot. Perhaps a whole lot of petrol bombs is the best move that you got. Then you may ask the question, what can one person do when the time to act is now? And now it's up to you. When it's 2019, but it feels like 1933.
Palestinians have been losing more and more of their land to Israeli theft since they lost the majority of it in 1948. In 1976, Palestinians protested against the theft of yet more of their land, and for doing so, they were massacred. This protest massacre became known as Land Day, one of many massacres on the Palestinian calendar that have been marked by annual protests ever since. In 2018, at the end of March, beginning with Land Day, Palestinians protesting under the banner of the Great March of Return rallied at the fence between Gaza and Israel, and they were shot at and killed by Israeli soldiers. Another Land Day massacre. Undeterred, they returned the next Friday, and every Friday for the rest of 2018 and well into 2019. The weekly massacres were global headlines for a couple of Fridays. Then, as a massacre of Palestinian children became a weekly Friday feature of reality, it stopped being a news story in the Western media.
Another day, another massacre of children. Children who have nothing good to show since their families became refugees so many years ago. When Zionists had launched their latest annexation, which awakened the resistance of the Palestinian nation. And they called it Land Day. For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. Another day, another massacre of children, with traumatized survivors of Nazi genocide, killing traumatized survivors across a new divide, a divide that was created by killing kids and taking land, with a twisted kind of logic only death can understand. And they called it Land Day. For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. Another day, another massacre of children. Children they call terrorists for throwing stones at tanks. Children they imprison for refusing to give thanks for the fact that no one is running gas chambers quite yet, though it's hard to see how much more like a death camp this can get. And they called it Land Day.
For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. For the day the land was stolen by the new crusaders. Another day, another massacre of children.
On May 17th, 2018, I happened to be in Belgium, and all the talk locally was about what happened on the highway to Antwerp. A van packed with refugees was on its way to the port, from where people were hoping to get to England. Cops were suspicious of the van and tried to pull it over, but the driver wouldn't stop. Rather than using any number of other means to stop the van, the police inexplicably decided to shoot at it with live ammunition. Equally inexplicably, they were aiming for the driver. If they had succeeded in hitting the driver, the consequences for everyone else in the van could have been catastrophic. As it was, the bullet missed the driver and hit the 2-year-old girl who was sitting on her mother's lap in the back seat, Mauda Shouri. Mauda represents part of the trend with refugees in Europe, who are increasingly dying in their efforts to get from France or Belgium to England.
Their country was invaded and destroyed. Then they had a baby boy. They sold everything they owned so they might escape the war zone. They took the Baltic route, north and west. It was the one the smuggler said was best. They got as far as Germany, which is where they had another baby. It's a deadly thing, what some call immigration. England was their final destination. In a crowded van, driving to the port, on past Flanders fields, another life cut short. Cops on every side, the vehicle surrounded. When the loud crack sounded, Mama held her daughter tight in place. Then she saw the bullet hit her face. And Mauda was her name. Mauda was her name. There are many ways to stop a van, many ways to do it. They can make a roadblock, for one. If you're under fire, you can use your gun, but all the bullets flew in one direction. At first they denied it, but at closer inspection, the cop was aiming for the driver's head. But he missed and hit the girl instead. And Mauda was her name. Mauda was her name. If the driver had been hit, how many more? Numbers would be added to the score of those who only wanted to raise a family, but then died on the shores of Turkey, or somewhere in the desert, or tortured in a prison, or on the bottom of the ocean, at a Baghdad checkpoint, or at a traffic stop, or shot down by a Belgian cop. Mauda was her name. Mauda was her name. Mauda was her name.
In April of 2019, Julian Assange was violently abducted from the Ecuadorian embassy by British police and taken to the maximum security Belmarsh prison, where he'd remain for years before his eventual surprise release. The U.S. was pursuing charges that might have resulted in a 175-year prison sentence. The U.S. authorities were clear that what Assange and WikiLeaks had done was help expose U.S. war crimes in Iraq, and for that, someone had to be punished. For many years, Assange expected to be arrested and expected these charges to be leveled by the U.S. The governments of the U.S., the UK, Ecuador, under its new right-wing leadership, and Sweden all put a lot of time and effort into trying to ruin Julian Assange's reputation in a very complex smear campaign involving allegations related to sexual impropriety as well as allegations of being a Russian agent of some kind. The campaign to destroy Julian Assange's reputation, as well as to destroy him mentally and physically through years of imprisonment and various forms of torture, was so involved and multifaceted that anyone hoping to understand it all basically needed to read a book. Nils Meltzer, longtime UN rapporteur on torture and human rights, wrote that book, thankfully. But before anyone picks up a book like that, they probably first need to have a solid suspicion that there's something more to this smear campaign than meets the eye. They need to have a suspicion that, in fact, they're lying, and they're lying about a man who has done more in the service of humanity in his lifetime, arguably, than just about anyone. I wrote the song, essentially, in the hope that people might pick up the book.
These prison walls, there's a man who's won awards for the work that he has done and all that it affords, such as the knowledge of the harbors committed in our name. They can't stop the message, so the messenger gets blamed. Behind these prison walls, in solitary confinement, in a land of rolling hills and royalty and other such refinement, is someone who is a hero to whistleblowers everywhere, who helped them tell the world of the crimes of Tony Blair. Behind these prison walls, you will find a mortal man, the reason why we know what happened in Afghanistan, when the soldiers of the empire, whose sunset long before were torturing civilians in their terror war. Behind these prison walls is a part of WikiLeaks, an eloquent orator, but you won't hear him speak. Locked away in silence, one who knows too well how those in power act when there's another war to sell. Behind these prison walls is one who stands accused of exactly what offenses the U.S. has refused to say precisely which, or to try to clear the mist
or to explain how he's not the same as other journalists. Behind these prison walls is a person they deprive of most of the things in life that keep us all alive. A person being tortured as we stand here now for revealing the war crimes. Why, when, where, how? Behind these prison walls, our very right to be informed of what the hell is going on is the teacup in this storm. With knowledge there is power, so the solution by the crown. A 24-hour-a-day indefinite lockdown behind these prison walls.
The global corporate press, with the very active and insidious involvement of the government of Sweden at various levels, and many other institutions to boot, was working hard to associate the name of Julian Assange in the public consciousness with sexual impropriety of one kind or another. When Assange was moved from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison in 2019, his partner, Stella, went public with the fact that she existed as such, and that she and Julian had managed to have 2 children in secret, while Julian was in what became a bizarre form of house arrest at the Ecuadorian embassy. She hoped in revealing herself and their little boys to the world, this might help counteract the smear campaign. In writing this song about how they met, my hope was to contribute to this effort a little bit as well.
Julian met Stella in the embassy, in the only room for 7 years that he would ever see. Guarded by police, with cops on every street, an unusual situation for the first time you should meet. When Julian met Stella, the time they spent was increasingly within the walls of a little tent, where they could have some privacy from the ever-present gaze, under which he was spending all his nights and days. When Julian met Stella, there was the chance of grace. Perhaps the president would decide to drop the case. They had 2 children beneath the watchful eyes of the Americans and British and all kinds of other spies. When Julian met Stella on Embassy Row, it was before he was abducted and forced to go to Belmarsh prison without a chance to speak, awaiting the extradition that the USA seeks. Julian met Stella, the folks at the UN, and people all around the world spoke out then. This journalist belongs among the free, not in prison for exposing crimes against humanity. When Julian met Stella.
By 2019, the housing crisis in America had reached astounding proportions, though in the years afterwards it only got much worse. A visit from the United Nations to Los Angeles drew comparisons to the worst refugee camps that lack the most basic facilities. By 2019, the numbers of people dying on the streets of Portland, Oregon were approaching an annual count of over 100. In Los Angeles County, the number of annual deaths of people living on the sidewalks or the streets exceeded 1,000 for the first time.
It's 2019. Looking around at the tents and trash and excrement scattered on the ground. So many mansions overlooking the sea. Stretch limos, Rolls Royces, and movie stars all over Los Angeles County. It's 2019. And one thing I know is most people wish we could rewind to a couple of decades ago. Before the rents tripled, folk began to move out into their cars, into their tents, where drivers look on however loudly you shout. It's 2019. But in a black and white photo, it could be 1929. Wherever you go, in every single neighborhood, hungry people wonder why some make billions on a blockbuster while so many are left out to die. It's 2019, where every 8 hours someone is found cold on the sidewalk beneath the glass and steel towers in the wealthiest nation in all of human history. So far from paradise, so close to Walt Disney. It's 2019. There's no Dust Bowl, just real estate speculators and all the lives they stole. I don't know what to think when I hear the reporters say 1,000 people died last year living on the streets of LA. It's 2019.
For progressives in the United States with any hope in electoral politics, 2020 began with a wave of hope. In the Democratic primaries, Sanders had won 22 states and was well on his way to being the Democratic Party candidate for president when the pandemic hit, combined with the DNC's machinations.
If he gets the nomination, let's be very clear, it won't be because of anything you hear on MSNBC, CNN, or NPR, when you're waiting in the waiting room or driving in your car. If he gets the nomination from coast to coast, it won't be because of essays printed in the Post. If he gets the nomination, it will not be because of any real support from the DNC or from most of the major figures that we've seen before, bailing out the banks or taking us to war. If he gets the nomination, they'd rather let him go than have socialism disrupt their status quo. If he gets the nomination, it will be one campaign against the nation's media and the entire gravy train of corporate welfare warlords and their captured state, the leaders of both parties with all their political weight. If he gets the nomination, it ain't the sign out on your lawn, if votes can even be counted in a country this far gone. If he gets the nomination, one thing we can say, it'll be in opposition to these forces we can see displayed. There will be no help from the wealthy or the institutions they control. No kleptocrats will volunteer to give back what they stole. If he gets the nomination, I'm not the only one who knows. It will be because the people rose. It will be because the people rose.
On April 1st, 2020, Jason Hargrove became one of the first fatalities of the COVID-19 pandemic. He would be one of many among the ranks of workers widely praised as essential as a bus driver in the city of Detroit, Michigan. The pandemic was quickly exposing the fault lines of capitalism, as the ruling class of the U.S. seemed to be realizing, as if for the first time, that the people in society whose work was most essential to daily life were generally some of the lowest paid and most precarious workers among us.
A pandemic is spreading, the health system's collapsing. You can watch it all unfolding on the screen. If you're afraid to go outside, enough groceries to hide, it may have been weeks since you have seen someone you can touch, and you miss it so much as you wonder what might happen next. Like when your savings run out and the choice is all about what kind of help you might be able to expect. Or perhaps when COVID arrived, while some struggled to survive, you were what they call essential. It didn't take long to see you got that wrong. The word they really meant was expendable. It didn't take long to see there was no emergency. Plans in place for something which all the scientists knew was just a matter of when there'd be a pandemic again. And the kleptocrats in power didn't have a clue. Otherwise, why did Jason Hargrove die? Because he kept keeping on, waking before dawn to do his part for society. Jason drove his bus, he didn't even make a fuss at the time of the impropriety. Somebody coughed, the virus was off. Not 2 weeks later, Jason would be dead. What if he had protective gear with sick passengers so near, with no barrier to protect his head? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Stay home, flatten the curve, they say, unless we need you to serve food for us or care for all the ill. In that case, we'll call you a hero, like the workers at Ground Zero, where one by one the cemetery filled. Now in every bus and truck, the drivers try their luck, essentially told, thank you for your services, these were the front lines. No one put up any signs. Did anyone sign up for this? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Once the death rate peaks in days or months or weeks with each one of the virus's waves, once we can take stock and recover from the shock of the sight of all of the mass graves, will this be the impetus, this driver on a bus, along with so many, many more? The nurses and the prisoners, seafarers and farm workers, what will they all die for? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Why did Jason Hargrove die?
The countries with functional public health systems and other social systems generally weathered the pandemic the best, with the least amount of social conflict or political polarization. The societies that had social systems of some kind but really weak ones, like the USA, found ways to keep things squeaking along, but with more difficulty and a much higher death toll. Although the Portland area is a hub for some major tech corporations, the state of Oregon was in the news in 2020 for reasons that are familiar to longtime residents of the state. For the outrageously out-of-date software the Oregon Employment Department uses to run its affairs. There was an expensive effort to reform the department that somehow failed years earlier, and we were still left with computers from the 1980s and getting programmers out of retirement who knew the programming languages that the systems in Oregon were still using. It took my family about 7 months of waiting to finally start getting checks.
Sit down for a minute, I'll tell you a story about lots of different people, including yours truly. When the pandemic hit, I had to cancel all my shows in the fight against the virus. I guess that's how it goes. They said to call this number if you need help with food and rent. It's the PUA division of the Department of Employment. So I get up every morning since the beginning of the spring. But if the department is open, the phone never rings. It's always beep, 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 the line is busy. Beep, 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 you'll have to wait. Beep, 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 the only answer, the tone of a failed state. There just aren't enough programmers who are still alive, who learned how to program back in 1985 when the last update was made to this broken mess. Like a testament to the definition of stress, it's always beep, 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 the line is busy. Beep, 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 you'll have to wait. Beep, 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 the only answer, the tone of a failed state. My application was rejected with notes that made no sense. It's been 6 months since I applied, since I've been staring at this fence. Survival sourced completely from the crowd, hearing stories of the hunger as I listen to the sound. Beep, 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 the line is busy. Beep, 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 you'll have to wait. Beep, 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 the only answer, the tone of a failed state. The department head got fired as the tragedies amount, but we're still waiting for relief, still 0 at last count. If you think the keg is burning, that there's tumult on this shore, if those checks don't come in soon, who knows what's in store. It's always beep, 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 the line is busy. Beep, 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 you'll have to wait. Beep, 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 the only answer, the tone of a failed state.